Good evening. I'm Lynn Ensroth. I'm a professor at the University of Tulsa College of Law, and it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all tonight to the University of Tulsa Lorton Performance Center. Like all of you here tonight, I am greatly looking forward to hearing Sister Helen Prejean speak tonight, but I hope you'll indulge me for just one brief minute as I take an opportunity to thank and recognize those who made this evening possible. Tonight's lecture is the result of a collaborative effort between the University of Tulsa College of Law and Tulsa Opera. Several months ago, the Tulsa Opera approached the College of Law to see if, given the school's interest in justice and law, particularly in connection with issues related to capital punishment, whether we might be interested in working with the Tulsa Opera to host Sister Helen Prejean as a prelude to the Tulsa Opera's operatic performance of Sister Helen's memoir, Dead Men Walking. We were delighted to work with such an important part of the Tulsa arts world and to bring these two institutions, the College of Law and Tulsa Opera, together in a joint venture. For me personally, and for the College of Law, it has been a wonderful opportunity to work with such an important part of the Tulsa arts community in bringing Sister Helen to us tonight. I would like to thank the University of Tulsa President Stedman Upham and Vice Provost Roger Blaze for supporting this program and allowing us to host this lecture in this incredibly lovely venue that we have here at the Lorton Performance Center. Further, I want to thank Dean Janet Levitt of the College of Law, not only for providing vital support for this program, but also for fostering the vision of a collaboration between our legal world, which can be sometimes a little dry, and the arts world, and the provocative world that it brings to us. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the artistic director of Tulsa Opera, Coasties Protopappas. Coasties was named the artistic director of Tulsa Opera in May of 2008 and is currently serving as the interim executive director. He previously served as the company's associate conductor and chorus master since 2001. His conducting credits with the Tulsa Opera include productions of Carmen and the Magic Flute, as well as student matinee performances of The Cunning Little Vixen and La Boheme. He now brings his artistic vision to Sister Helen Prejean's monumental work, Dead Man Walking, and he will introduce and welcome Sister Helen here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. It's great to be back on the stage of the Lorton Performance Center. This is a really beautiful theater. It's such a pleasure to be here again. And I'm thrilled in turn to welcome all of you on behalf of Tulsa Opera in this very exciting event that we're presenting in conjunction with what I believe is the long overdue Tulsa Opera premiere of what is the most successful American opera of recent years, J. Kegg's Dead Man Walking. It's always very exciting to produce contemporary American works that have direct and obvious relevance to contemporary life because they give us ample opportunity to enhance our bonds with the community through partnerships such as this. So I'm really grateful to the University of Tulsa College of Law for their partnership and all the work that they put into planning today's event. Another benefit of producing contemporary opera is that all of us who work on the opera get to meet their creators, and we have the opportunity to bring those creators here and introduce them to our community. However, it's not often that we get to meet the opera heroine herself, especially when that heroine is a best-selling author, a human rights advocate, a Nobel Prize nominee, and an international spokesperson for tolerance and compassion. A woman who turned her own personal journey into a message of positive change in the way humans see, understand, and treat one another. To borrow some of her own words, it is the religious community's role to reconcile the irreconcilable. I find that that is often the role of art as well. In any case, very few of us are courageous enough to try to achieve this in real life, the way our speaker tonight is doing. For that reason, her voice is not only powerful, inspiring, and convincing, but also poetic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sister Helen Prejean.
And a Southern storyteller. And I'm going to take you with me through this story. I'm going to start. I wrote 2 books, Dead Man Walking, the opera's based on. The second book was Death of Innocence, about accompanying 2 people to execution that I believe are innocent. You get to make up your own mind, just exposing how the system works and how that's not a fluke, that can happen. The third book that I'm writing now is called River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey. And this is how I begin it. The prequel in the book starts like this. I watched a man be killed with fire one night. They strapped him in an oaken chair and pumped electricity through his body. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders that night protested his killing, but I was there, and I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my heart on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And now I will take you into the spiritual currents that pulled me to the killing chamber that night. And that's how River of Fire begins. And then I begin and just talk about all my life as a child and the Catholic family and unfolding. And because Dead Man Walking is very much a faith journey for me. I'm a Catholic nun. I believe in the gospel of Jesus. I, believe in prayer, in liturgy, in Eucharist, in gathering the community together. But I was totally at first unconnected to social justice issues because I very much was with people that were just like me. And I had grown up in, well, now I realize what you call white privilege. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My daddy was a successful lawyer. And in days of really deep segregation, the only way I knew African-American people was as our servants. Ellen worked in the house with Mom, and Jesse worked in the yard. I didn't even know their last names. And so being a nun and being a teacher, I'm still out in the suburbs. And for me, the whole gospel of Jesus was about being charitable, being kind. And every Thanksgiving, we'd collect our little cans and stuff to give to poor people at Thanksgiving, that we should be kind to each other. We should share with each other. But I didn't get it about justice. And I was so separated from people in the inner city in New Orleans. I mean, when Hurricane Katrina hit, over 100,000 people who were poor were left to drown in the city. They didn't have cars. They didn't have resources. Pack up and go to Houston or go to Baton Rouge or go to Jackson, Mississippi. They were left to drown. And I was disconnected. And I didn't know what the gospel of Jesus had to do with that anyway, because, I'm going to the parts of Scripture that kind of back up where I am. We all tend to do that. And I just said, well, Jesus said, not by bread alone do people live. You can't just take care of the material needs of people. If they're close to God and they suffer with Jesus, well, one day they're going to have a great crown in heaven. I didn't know anything about poor people. And it was the waking up to the gospel. It was the waking up to what Jesus really meant by the least of these, and that I needed to be on the side of people who were despised, who were thrown away, who were said, well, that's those poor people and those violent people, and you know what they do. And that's what really began my journey. And that's the way the book of Dead Man Walking opens up. In the St. Thomas housing projects and me looking at the underside of American history, me looking at the other America of what life was like if you didn't have resources, if you didn't go to St. Joseph Academy like I did, if you didn't have a daddy who was a lawyer, who had connections, and even if we had gotten into trouble, he would have called the judge, or he'd have called a bishop, or he'd have called somebody. And I'm seeing it from a whole different point of view. And that led straight to death row. Not that I planned it, you understand. It was like I never dreamed I was going to go to death row. In the beginning, after the book came out, that was the favorite question of the media. What's a nun doing on death row? And at first, I used to tell them, well, it's the upward mobility of the gospel of Jesus. But they didn't get it about the upward mobility. I stopped saying that. And so I go to death row. The story in this opera, I'm going to tell you what's so great about this opera. You talk about take you on a ride. I don't know if an opera house ever puts safety belts to put on like when you're going to drive in a car, but you ought to be given that because it's going to open up with the most terrible thing you can imagine. It's what we all have to navigate through emotionally with the issue of the death penalty. Because we're not talking about innocent life. And people who call themselves pro-life, and they say, yeah, I'm pro-life, but I'm for the death penalty. Yeah, pro-life means innocent life. But these people have crossed the line. They have killed an innocent person. And Terrence McNally did a bold thing. He's the librettist. Jake Hagee is the composer of the music. Neither of these men had ever done an opera before. I, of course, had never written a book before that they're going to do an opera. We were all like new to this. And Terrence, what he did in the opening scene is we all are going to watch it. We all are going to watch an unspeakable event of the murder of two innocent people. And we're going to know who did it. So the opera's not going to waste any emotional or spiritual energy on did he do it or not? Is he guilty or not? If he's guilty, well, then he ought to. None of that. We meet him, and we don't like him because he's not remorseful, and he doesn't own up to what he does. And inside all of us, we're saying, well, that's what the death penalty is for. When we know they're guilty and they do a truly unspeakable act, then that's what the death penalty is for. And so bring it on. And then, of course, the journey, the aria of my character is my journey. And I'm still on it. Learning, going with it, being with people. And so the journey began, as I told you, because I got involved with poor people in New Orleans. And just like all of my classmates, when you went to a good high school, the whole thing is what college, what university you're going to go to. Met some of the students in the law school here today. I mean, these are beautiful young people, asking the questions, digging into the issues, developing their minds, developing their consciences, developing the frontal edge of what they're going to do in the world. And that's what good education does for you. And we all talked about what university you're going to go to, and every family I'm meeting when I awaken to poor people in New Orleans is who was in what prison. It could have been in India. I felt like I was in another country. And then to just get sucked into this, kind of. Because one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center where I was working to help people who had dropped out of school, or like Miss Ruby, she was 68 years old. She just wanted to learn how to read the Bible before she died. So working with Miss Ruby to learn to read, working with the gospel, with Isaiah, and then coming out one day out of the Adult Learning Center, this friend of mine from the Prison Coalition office, and this is the way the book Dead Man Walking opens. He says, "Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal with somebody on death row?" I thought, yeah. Sure, I could do that. I was an English major. You know, I could write some nice letters. Maybe do a poem or two. I never dreamed they were going to kill this person. And you're going to see that in the opera. You're going to see Sister Helen writing a letter, going to see the guy. You know, when the film of Dead Man Walking came out, I got a letter from a man one time. He said, "Sister, when I saw that film, I thought to myself, that nun is getting in so over her head. That guy's going to con her." And it's true. I didn't know anything. I wrote the man a letter, and he wrote back. And then he didn't have anybody to visit him, so I tell him I'll come visit him. And then he filled in the visitor forms, and you don't just show up at the gates of the prison and say, "Hi, I'm here to visit Patrick Saunier." And they introduce you then into the visitor chamber where they serve refreshments, and we'll take you to see your person. You had to fill in what was your relationship. Were you friend? Were you girlfriend? Were you wife? Were you ex-wife? Really want to know that because they don't want any scenes at the prison. And he had said simply, "I'm a Catholic and you're a nun. Would you be my spiritual advisor?" I filled it in. It was 1982. We hadn't had an execution in Louisiana in over 20 years. I never dreamed they were going to kill him. I figured I'd go visit him. We'd have some good letters together. I believe deeply in his humanity. It's all going to unfold for me. And if I had known when I wrote that first letter, if a little over 2 years later, I'm going to be in that death chamber with him, and they're going to kill him at midnight, and at 5:45, everybody has to leave the death chamber where they keep him in a holding cell, have a guard position next to his cell to make sure he doesn't try to commit suicide, and that at 5:45, everybody has to leave except the spiritual advisor. I could never have said yes, because it's going to be me who's going to be there with him and accompanying him. And that's the story. You got a naive nun writing a man on death row, not knowing much about the law, not knowing much about crime, not knowing much about terrible things that happen to innocent people. And you can come with me on the journey. So Sister Helen sings, and it's a haunting, beautiful song. I love it. I sing it in the shower sometimes. I don't sing much opera in the shower. But it goes, "My journey to the truth, my journey." And then Jake Hagee does these leitmotifs all through, and you can hear little snippets of that all the way through this. And so I go to visit him on death row and got a shock when the guards brought me in. Very scary. Kept bringing you behind these clang gates, and the woman on the tier, and everybody has to drop off. And there's no soft sounds in a prison. Jake Hagee, who's a composer, as soon as he and Terrence McNally were talking about what opera they were going to do for Lotfi Mansouri, who was the head of the San Francisco Opera, and he commissioned a new opera for the millennial year. And when Terrence McNally said to Jake, "Why don't we do Dead Man Walking?" Jake said, music started coming into my head, and the hairs stood up on the back of my neck because I could hear the clang of metal, and then I could hear the soft, the tender, the violent, everything coming together. And so they locked me in a room, and that line, "Woman on the tier," makes it into the opera. You're going to hear it, clanging of things, and going, "Woman on the tier, woman on the tier, woman on the tier." And every time I hear that, I go, "Oh, man, I remember that. I remember the guards, woman on the tier." And then they lock me in a room, and they say, "Well, go get your man." And you're going to see this in the opera, the meeting of the man, the death row inmate, the first meeting. Tense, unsure. But I'll tell you this, the first time when I looked at his face through this heavy metal mesh screen that was separating us from each other, I expected, of course, I'd see a face of somebody. I thought if you murdered somebody, your face looked different. I don't know anything, okay? You got that already. But I thought, well, will his eyes be mean, or will there be a set of his jaw? And the guards brought him in, and I looked at him, and I went, "Oh my God, he's so human." Now you're going to see Joseph DeRoche, tough and tense, because he's meeting me for the first time, too. What does he expect of a nun? Never thought I'd be here talking with no nun. And so the encounter and the journey begins for both of us. And so the real person, I've accompanied 6 human beings to execution. And along the way, I've also met victims' families. And the crunch of this story is around a really bad mistake I made. And I can give reasons for it because I'd never done it before and I was naive. But I meet Patrick, and then I looked up on my own. I waited till he trusted me enough to tell me what he did, because I figured you got to trust somebody before you're going to tell them the worst thing you ever did in your life. And I would wait for that from him, but I didn't want to be naive, and I go into the Prison Coalition office, and I said, could I see the background information on the Saunier case? And they said, sure. Now, I've already met Pat and his brother Eddie, who was serving 2 life sentences for the same murder. Now, the opera version as well as the film version is, as Tim Robbins explained to me about the film, you got to cut to the chase. You got 2 hours to do a film. We're going to do a composite character. So in the film, it's Matthew Poncelet. In the opera, it's Joseph DeRoche. And 2 people are killed, and so we're going to meet the victim's family. And whenever I'm talking to people, religious people, Christian people, I always use the 2 arms of the cross because it's going to stretch us over to both sides. And where I made my big mistake was when I saw what the crime was, that these 2 young people had been killed. And I remember thinking, this is every parent's worst nightmare. And in real life, their kids had gone to a homecoming football game on a Friday night in November, and they never saw them alive again. And the sheriff's deputies are at the door asking the fathers to come down to the morgue to identify their children. And then I'm finding out about the crime now. And it's like, your heart and your emotions are strafed because it was unspeakably terrible. They killed these kids, these innocent kids. And I remember the first thing was, the outrage over the death of these 2 innocent kids. And then the guilt. I'm spiritual advisor to the 2 people who killed these innocent kids. What am I doing with them? And then I thought of the parents, and I thought, I ought to do something for the parents. But I was scared because I thought, what if I go see them and they say, sister, we want to see justice done. We're going to be sitting on that front row for the execution. Can you be there with us? Do you believe these people honestly deserve to live? They killed our child. Patrick had gotten the death penalty. His brother didn't. But it's like Joseph DeRoche is the one. And we know he did it early on. I thought, what would I say to them? Everybody was Catholic in this. The Saunier, Pat and Eddie Saunier, the Bourques who lost their daughter, the LeBlancs who lost their son, David, their 17-year-old son, their only son. They were too old to have another child. Their family name died with his killing. And I stayed away because I thought, I could just make things worse. It was cowardice. Sometimes your editor's the one who helps you. Because when I wrote the first draft of Dead Man Walking, I downplayed this thing of not visiting, reaching out to the victim's family, even to write a note to say, I'm so sorry about your son, David. I'm so sorry about your daughter, Loretta. Nothing. I did nothing because I was scared. And I met them. At the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family. It was at that pardon board hearing, which can't be more polarized. The closest you ever come in modern times to being in the Roman amphitheater where you put your thumb up if you want somebody to live or your thumb down if you want somebody to die is at a public pardon board hearing before somebody's executed. And that's when I met the victim's family. And how could they not see me as an enemy? And they're there. They've been told to bring all their friends, all their relatives, Because here's the last legal hoop they got to jump through to get justice for their dead child. And that's when I met them. While the pardon board was voting, we're walking outside, and the opera gets it. And the heart of the tension in this opera is the meeting with the victim's family, because I clearly am now on the side of the one who did the killing. And I'm his spiritual advisor, and I'm going to be with him to the end. And I meet them. And I mean, Jay Kagi and the music captures this thing of the parents meeting me and singing, "You don't know what it's like to see your child walk out the door and you'll never see him alive again. You don't know what it's like to bear a child and then to have to put that child in the grave. You don't know what it's like. You're a nun, you don't have children. So yeah, sure, you can be on the side of Jesus, you can be for the gospel, but you don't know what it's like to bury your own child. What do you know? You just say your prayers and go to sleep." And I meet them, and it's at the pardon board hearing. And it couldn't be worse. In real life, what happened is the boys' parents, well, the girls' parents were furious at me, as I deserved. And they walked past me. They didn't say anything. The boys' parents were right behind. And this is captured in Mr. Hart, who's lost his child. And you're going to hear his pain. You're going to hear him describe what he's lost and that encounter at the pardon board. Now, in real life, what happened is that the girl's parents were mad, angry, wanted to have nothing to do with me. But the grace came from the father of the boy who had been killed. His name was Lloyd LeBlanc. And he walked right up to me outside that pardon board hearing. And he said, "Sister Helen, all this time you've been with those two brothers, and you never once came to see us. You can't believe the pressure being put on us with the death penalty." Well, I never thought of a victim's family being under any kind of pressure. What does he mean, pressure? I said, "Oh, Mr. LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." And he said, "Sister, you need to come, and you need to walk in our shoes." He said, "You come with me. I pray in this little chapel in St. Martinsville. Come pray with me." And I said, "I will." He was the gracious one. He could have shunned me and been angry and turned away. But he reached out his hand to say, "Come pray with me," an invitation I couldn't refuse. And so then my journey began of being alongside victims' families. Is it possible for any human being to suffer the loss of your child or your loved one and not be condemned forever into a stance of hatred, be it legalized, be it justified? And when I met him, he said, "Sister, what I mean by pressure is everybody was saying to me, 'Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty. It'll look like you didn't love David.' I mean, you had the ultimate loss, and you almost lost your wife. She almost broke mentally completely under the loss of her son, and you're not going to choose the ultimate punishment? What's wrong with you? Did you do something bad with your boy?" He said, "Everybody was telling me that." He was the one who shared with me the journey, and he's the hero of Dead Man Walking in the book. He's approached on his journey by Mr. Hart. We hear his anger, we hear his pain, we hear him saying, "Don't you believe the one who killed our child deserves to die?" And which of us hearing them doesn't understand that would be just where we would be too? But with Lloyd LeBlanc, he shared with me the journey. And I came to understand what it might mean for somebody to be thrown into this fire and to come out whole on the other side. Not always without that pain in their hearts to always know. One time I was at a meeting of people who were the survivors of the Oklahoma City bombing. There were all these families in there. Some had had children or people killed in the Oklahoma City bombing. Some of the rescue workers who had gone in the building to bring out the children. 168 people killed in that bombing. And I remember that I had facilitated it, and people were all sharing their pain, all talking about trying to help each other. What do you do? How could we get past this? Well, I want to see Timothy McVeigh die. I mean, people getting up to the mic. Who doesn't understand that? Because they're going to be allowed on, closed-circuit TV. Watch Timothy McVeigh die. We're going to kill him for killing your loved one, and we're going to give you justice. And I always remember there was a man sitting over to the right, kind of opposite me at the mic, and I hadn't even noticed him. And we were calling the afternoon to an end, and people were talking on all sides of it, and what can we do to heal, and how can we help each other. And the man, he just said, "Could I say something?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Could we just not use that word closure anymore?" He said, "You close on a house. You close a chapter of a book, but our daughter was killed in that bombing. And as her father, there's not a night I lay my head on the pillow and I don't pray for my daughter because I wasn't there to protect her. I would have thrown my own body over her to protect her. Can we just stop using that word closure?" And so when I'm with this man, Lloyd LeBlanc, and we're praying together in this little chapel in St. Martinville, Louisiana, deep in Acadiana and Cajun territory. He was Cajun. Soniers were Cajun. It was all people of Acadian descent. And here's how he told me. Here's the journey that he took. He said, everybody was saying that to me, and I went, yeah, they're right. Look at how Eula's been suffering. I reach over on the side of the bed at 2 in the morning, and Eula, the bed's empty, and I know where she is. I know she's in the kitchen. I know she's crying. We had to move David's grave. We buried him in a family plot in another town, and we had to move him in a cemetery close by so Eula can visit his grave every day. So he said, I've been there, and I know that loss. And then they're saying to me, justice means, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty. And he said, boy, I went there. He said, I did. I just said, they're right. I want to see him die. I wish both of them had gotten the death penalty. And I want to be sitting on that front row, and I wish they'd let me throw the switch. And then he said, as I went there, though, I didn't like the way that made me feel. I didn't like that hatred and that bitterness coming over me. He said, sister, you got to understand. I learned this from my mom and daddy. I've always been a kind person. I love to help people. I'm good with my hands. I can fix anything. If I'm coming along the highway at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody's broken down, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to help them because it's who I am. And then I found myself like getting in all this hatred and bitterness, and I don't care about them. I don't care about their mother, that this is going to cause her a problem. I just want to see it happen. And finally, and he just said, They killed our son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. And he set his face to go down the road. And in the opera, it's going to take you over to both sides, the suffering on both sides. And you're not going to see anything all tied up, all neatly at the end. That's going to have to happen inside you of dealing with it and just saying, what are we going to do here and what kind of society will we be? Of what do we do in response when someone has done such an unspeakable act? And aren't we perfectly justified? And doesn't justice demand that we take the life of the one who did that? That's the moral crunch of the whole thing about the death penalty. And you can hear people in the debate on both sides, and you can hear people say, when I know they're guilty, no doubt about it, we shouldn't be killing the innocent, but when we know they're guilty, bring it on. And so the opera takes us through this tremendous journey. And what's so just keeps surprising you. It keeps bringing you into places you don't expect to go. Because right after the prologue, where we all witness this terrible murder, the very next scene, here's I am with Sister Rose with the kids in the St. Thomas Housing Project, and you know these little children, they clapping and they're singing, God will gather us around, all around. God will gather us around. Father and mother, sister and brother gather us around. We just watched the biggest separation you could imagine. And it sounds so naive, and it sounds so impossible. Like the words of Jesus sound impossible. Love your enemies. Don't let the sun set on your hatred or your anger. Pray for those who hurt you. What can possibly be meant by those words? Is that possible for us? We got to fight fire with fire. People do these terrible crimes. This is the way we show justice. And it's not to put a judgment on anybody. We are all in this. And believe me, even though I had met Patrick Saunier and I had met his brother, and I'd seen the humanness in their faces, and I realized they're worth more than the worst thing they've ever done in their life. When I heard and when I met the parents of these kids who had suffered this, my own heart was torn. William Faulkner, when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, said the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And that's us on an issue like this. Because it's not a question of innocence. It's a question of guilt in the most unspeakable way. And don't we owe this to victims' families? Now, when you read the book, you can get a lot of information about how this thing really works. This is the theory of the death penalty. This is our Supreme Court saying to us, okay, we're going to put the death penalty back, but only do the death penalty for the worst of the worst. Don't do it for your garden variety, ordinary murders. You don't know what that means? Nobody knows what that means. And we can't get into all these stories, but think of being a juror. Think of being a juror. Ordinary people like us. Now we've thrown into this room, locked door, 12 of us. We know the person's guilty, but now we each got to decide, does he live or die? And it's got to be a unanimous decision. And if anybody dissents, anybody doesn't vote for death, the person lives, so we each have his life in our hands. And now we get to decide. And we know the alternative in this state, as in all the states now, is if we do not sentence him to die, we know this person is going to serve life without possibility of parole, will disappear over the prison walls and never be heard of again. But we are called on to decide. And if you've ever been to a death penalty trial, and I want to speak for the goodness and uprightness of everybody in the process. I don't want to say the prosecutors are all real bad people, and all the people on this side are real good people. Everybody's just trying to do their job. And so you'll hear the prosecutor saying to the jury, now this, I want you to steel your spine. As citizens, we want to ask you, look at that family. They're never going to see their young woman, child, ever graduate from college. They're never going to see their grandchildren. Do justice for this family. And doesn't justice demand? He didn't respect her human rights. He killed her in cold blood. They're never going to see their child alive again. Do justice for this family. And more and more and more, as the argument has become distilled over the death penalty, it's begun to resolve around what do we do for the family. In the beginning, we thought it'd be deterrence. 2/3 of the American people thought, well, if we fight fire with fire, if they kill and then we threaten with their own death, what could be a better deterrent than that? Hey, I better not kill, or better not kill the witnesses against me at trial, and I'll kill them too, because I might die. Isn't the greatest deterrence would be self-preservation of life and people would think twice. Of course, as the police chiefs of this country who have been asked twice about this, the latest in, I think, 2009 or 2010, given a list of 10 remedies of what would deter violence, they all put the death penalty dead last, because they said the people doing the thinking and the people doing the murdering are two separate sets of people. Most of the people that kill somebody didn't know when they woke up that morning they were going to kill anybody. They get in a situation, they got a gun, boom, the person's dead. And they're not thinking they're even going to be caught, much less about consequences. But that's getting into the nitty-gritty of should we do it or not, or does it have the consequence. The heart of it is, what are we going to do for the victim's family? And doesn't it almost decency require of us that we offer them that? And we're at an interesting time. You know, we've been at the death penalty since the Supreme Court put it back in 76. And look at what's happening across the nation. We're in real diminishment of the practice of the death penalty. People are just not carrying it out. States, even Texas, that had, on average, this is Harris County in Houston. It's the buckle of the death penalty belt. And they would get, on average, 48 death sentences a year, handed down by juries, sought by prosecutors. Last year, there were 2. Those juries know that the alternative is a life sentence. People know they have to keep us safe. But then to hold in your hands as a juror that I have decided that this human being will die and only death will do, that's something else. When I came out of that execution chamber after Patrick, who was the first, and I remember thinking, the people are never going to get close to this. It's a secret ritual. How many people have you killed in Oklahoma? I mean, you're known for a couple of things here. One is your death row is underground. The men call it the tombs, because once you posit in your mind that people can be put to death, so you live underground. Hey, it's never supposed to be easy. So pain's supposed to be part of this. So anticipating dying is supposed to be part of it. Everybody I've known on death row has the same nightmare. They're coming to get me. It's my time. The guards are dragging me out of my cell. I'm going, no, no, no. Then I wake up, and it was only a dream. My time hasn't come yet. All of that is part of the decision to say that we can select some human beings and we can kill them. I mean, we have Justice Scalia, who perhaps best exemplifies it on the Supreme Court, saying about lethal injection, like we don't know if the anesthetic put them out. And I said, slap them around, see if they're awake. Pain's supposed to be part of death. You kill, we punish you, and you suffer, and punishment is part of it. And I remember thinking how, I guess it's really when my mission was born that I had been drawn in as a witness and that I had to tell the story. And believe me, before there was a book, I never knew I was going to write a book. These things get leached out of you when you get thrown into this stuff. And so I would just go and give talks to whoever would listen, and I would talk about what it means for the state to kill a human being. And mostly I'm coming in on the front end of human rights and all that. And as I'm giving the talk, especially with college students at Loyola University, man, they are going, what about the victim's family? What about the victim's family? And when I worked with Jason Epstein, when I wrote Dead Man Walking for Random House, he said, Helen, in the first draft, you wait far too long to talk about the crime. You got to introduce it in the first 10 pages of this book, or people are not going to read your book. And so then the book. But before, when I'd give talks to whoever would listen, I mean, I didn't have any big audiences, believe me. I mean, St. Christopher's Nursing Home, here was the nadir, right here, the nadir of the whole thing. I just said, would you like me to come give a talk about the death penalty? I'd like to talk about my personal experiences. Oh, sure, sister, you come on. And then after lunch, they announce, who wants to hear the death penalty none go to parlor A? And 3 people. Now, they had just eaten lunch. I got to say that because it's going to be bad. And I go in parlor A, and these 3 people, and after 10 minutes, 2 of them are gone. I mean, gone. And one lady's listening, and I'm saying, I lock my eyes with that lady, like, don't leave me, lady. You're it. And when Susan Sarandon read the book while she was doing the client in Memphis, and she pestered and stayed on Tim Robbins' case for 9 months till he broke down, probably for domestic tranquility, and read the book. And then he wrote the screenplay. And he positioned it, both arms of the cross, to take people over to both sides and leave them there. And the theater managers told Tim Robbins, we've never shown a film that where the end of the film, people stayed in their seats till the screen went blank and they filed out in silence because they were thinking. And if a film can do that with celluloid in front of you, imagine live drama bringing you there with music to take our hearts into places we don't even know we have. It is honest. It is bold. It's not in any kind of way sentimental. And it's going to take you into it. And I'm so grateful for the people who are doing this. You know, it takes a certain amount of courage for an opera company because, you know, well, you got your donors and all with the opera company. And, you know, you got the little, what they call the museum pieces. Are we going to have Madame Butterfly and La Boheme? Well, there's this modern opera we want to do. They go, ooh, there's going to be controversy. They're going to say that's political. We're not doing that opera. Scary. Opera company has to be bold to do something that's connected to contemporary issues. And this opera company did it. This is a little opera company that could and is bringing it to Tulsa. So welcome to the journey. I'm glad to be here with you. We have some books in the back. I'll be glad to sign them for you. So let me stop here and so we can have conversation together. Any questions you have, comments you have, we can talk about it now. I presume they're going to light y'all up. So I can see the faces of the people asking the questions. And here comes a wonderful arbitrator of these questions.
You need a lawyer, don't you?
Yeah, I need a lawyer here.
Sister Helen said we will take questions, and then she will be signing books after.
Sure. So what do you want to know?
Microphone's here. Line up at the microphones, I've been told. Questions?
Be bold. Or comment, too. What do you think? Or Innocence Project, Southern Poverty Law Center. Once you start learning how the death penalty is handed down, despite the theory of what it's supposed to be, it's all poor people on death row. And when I wrote Death of Innocence, I was so shocked. I thought it would be a fluke if ever an innocent person. But it all has to do with what came out at trial and whether or not you can get a hearing about it in an appeals court afterwards. And so the Innocence Project, there are 140 people now who were wrongly convicted, who've been, who have gotten off of death row, saved by college volunteers, which the Innocence Projects are. Okay.
Sister Helen, we have some questions here. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I feel honored to be here, and you had a wonderful presentation. I was wondering, I was just curious what your thoughts about capital punishment were before you had this journey.
Yeah. Well, I started out as a traditional Catholic kid. I mean, that was the traditional teaching of a lot of Christian churches. coming out of a history like Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century, Augustine in the 5th century, where the state had the right to execute criminals to keep society safe. But of course, it was during a time when they didn't have prisons and they didn't have alternative ways. So there's been evolution and development in this, as there has been on human rights around the world. 40 years ago, only a handful of countries didn't have the death penalty. Today, the majority of the 194 members of the United Nations don't have the death penalty. Why? Because society is moving toward away from using violence, which in its essence is imitating the behavior of the criminal, because we have prisons and we have a way of keeping ourselves safe. So what happened to me is, growing up as a youngster, I never questioned the death penalty. In fact, when I did research for Dead Man Walking, I found out there was a portable electric chair they would move from jail to jail in Louisiana. And not far from St. Joseph Academy on Broussard Street, where I went to school, was the jail. And they had a portable electric chair where they had killed people, and I never even knew about it. I don't even think I heard it discussed in theology classes about social justice issues of any kind. Well, that's very different today. And I mean, they did a poll on young Catholics, because you're getting it in school, that human rights and the death penalty, we have alternatives, is part of being pro-life. In the second book, I talk about the dialogue I got to have with Pope John Paul, and I said, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? When I'm walking with a man to execution, and he's chained hand and foot, surrounded by guards, and he says, sister, please pray God holds up my legs. There is no dignity in this death. And so the Catholic Church, like all Christian churches, we have a way to keep ourselves safe without imitating the violence and using violence as a redemptive means to try to save ourselves, or to say it's the only way we can be safe.
Thank you for your work. It's wonderful.
Thank you for being here.
I'm an artist. I've got a painting in the Eye for Eye show, and I've lost a loved one to a serial killer, and it was tragic and it was horrible. But what are we doing with the poor mothers that create these killers? You know, that's the thing. Women's issues, like working with your kids in school.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it starts, right?
Yeah.
What do you
Well,
do with that?
like the mothers, yeah, go ahead. Is that all you wanted
Well,
to say?
that's just what I'm saying. It's like understanding where this comes from,
Yeah.
and working like the church does with the poor,
That's right.
educating, helping with the kids,
That's right.
and what we can do with
Yeah. And you know, the opera,
single moms.
yeah, I don't know if you know this, but in the opera, the mother of Joseph de Rocher has a very central part. We never, in the film, she's not looked at real closely, but she is part of this.
Good.
And she sings, you know, when the victims' families are singing, you don't know what it's like, see your child walk out the door, and then she's almost forgotten over on one side of the stage, and then she begins to sing, you don't know what it's like to see your child slip through your hands. Over 90% of people on death row were abused as children. A friend of mine put it this way, he says, the violence pumped into them, one day, they take out on innocent people. And then what we want to do is kill them. So look at the tragedy compounded on tragedy here of mothers who could see their children slipping out of their hands. But what is she up against? And how can she be there for her child? And then they get in with the wrong gang, and they get on drugs or whatever it is. Fetal alcohol syndrome, all these things, where the mother drinks during pregnancy. Fetal alcohol syndrome is a disconnect in the brain. I just came from a friend's house. They had adopted a child. He had fetal alcohol syndrome. He killed an elderly couple, and they called him the smiling murderer. He's walking in for his trial, and he's smiling at everybody, and he no more connected to the fact that he killed two innocent people. And it's not because he was evil. There was a disconnect in his brain. Or what we're doing with young people, sentencing young people, 14 years old, to death in prison, trying them as adults. Their brains aren't even developed. The frontal lobe isn't even developed, their cortex. And we're sentencing them because we identify them with the crime. And that's just such a slam dunk way of dealing with things, because look at the crime, don't tell me he's a kid. Look at what he did, and we're going to sentence him to prison, life without parole for the rest of his life. And there are 70 young people at least under this right now in this country. Somebody else?
I also want to welcome you to Tulsa and Oklahoma.
Thank you.
We have unique challenges here, as you were mentioning, about people assuming taking a stand on an issue makes them political, whatever. As a longtime member of Amnesty International and other similar human rights groups, how do you suggest encouraging and engaging people locally to feel more comfortable speaking out on issues like this?
Well, first, you really have to be educated yourself, and you have to become convinced about something. I mean, look, any social movement in this country to do away with slavery, for women to get the vote, is because people got it, understood it, and began to stand up, began to write to the legislators, began, when there's an execution, not to be silent and complicit, standing up, writing letters to the editor. And that's the way any moral issue is. Amnesty was one of my first teachers. And I remember two really important things I learned from Amnesty. For starters, I've been learning from them ever since. I'd never thought much about human rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 3, everybody has a right to life. Article 5, no one should be subjected to cruel and degrading punishment or torture. Is the death penalty torture? Is it mental torture? We signed the UN Convention against torture. It includes mental torture. The definition of torture is an extreme mental or physical assault on someone rendered defenseless. So I began to learn about human rights from Amnesty. And human rights are inalienable to us as persons. Simply because we're persons, we have these rights. So governments don't give human rights for good behavior, and they can't take them away for bad behavior. I learned that from Amnesty. And the other thing was, when something's done in a culture, at first it's just like, this is what we do, and it's impossible to change. It has been like this. It'll always be like this. Oklahoma will always be a state that executes people like the other 35 states here. It's never going to change. And Amnesty said, when you begin to have discourse, when you begin to discuss, when you begin to get facts, when you begin to have moral consideration of what it is that we're doing, the first step in it is to create doubt. You put a little chink in the wall. Yeah, there's this, and yeah, if it was my child who was killed, or yeah, we got to do something tough to show criminals, but to create doubt. And I have come to realize the power of art is not to try to convince us or persuade us that whatever your belief is when you come in to see this performance, that is to try to sway you over to the other side, but it's to open it up to both sides so that you can travel within your own heart to begin to reflect at a deeper level. There are three things I can think of in society that help us reflect at a deeper level. One is education, the other is spirituality, and the other is the arts. Arts to be true art. Tim Robbins said when he did the movie of Dead Man Walking, he said, I'm against the death penalty, but I'm not going to do a film that stacks the whole movie to get people to come out on the other side to be against the death penalty. That's propaganda. True art means you open it up on both sides and you let the audience figure it out for themselves. And hopefully it awakens in us a desire to go deeper, and then we go and we start getting information that we didn't have before. And then we move to action. And the action of others always inspires us. We see others acting. We see letters to the editors going in. When I'm talking in high schools and to young people, I'm saying, begin to write to your legislators. Just say, why are we doing this in our state? I found out about politicians. They love to be loved by young people. You know, show they hip, they on YouTube, all that. You know, they love the young people to love them. Just start writing letters to them, just saying, I'm a young person, I'm not voting yet, but I really wonder why we're doing this. And get the reflection going on it. Next.
Oh, hello. I'm
Hi.
one of the students at the College of Law, and I just wanted to say thank you again for coming. My question is, in the news lately, in the past few years, they've talked about the availability of the chemical cocktail they use in lethal injection. Someone who's kind of an insider and sees both sides of this, do you think that's going to force the conversation? Do you think we're at that point of whether or not we can continue this practice? Or do you think we're just going to find some other method of doing it?
Well, just if you follow this, it's really interesting. I mean, we have tried to make death so antiseptic that they put alcohol on the person's arm before they inject it. And it's a sheet on the gurney. It looks like a hospital bed. Because we're trying to get away from it. We're not really killing a person tonight. And it was Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, came up with the lethal injection thing. He said, look, we put horses down and animals. Why don't we do that with the criminals? Now we get more and more into the dilemma of who produces the lethal injection cocktail, and the places in Italy, and then there was one in Denmark when they found out how it was being used, saying you can't use our, chemicals that we produce to kill human beings. And they're making them sign that it will not be used to kill human beings. So you have the crunch coming. The reason that's not going to be what's going to shut it down, though, is there's no oversight in states of what they do in their protocol. I mean, I know in Louisiana, they just they got some people, they met informally with doctors, said, here's what you can use. They wrote it down on a napkin. Here, use these 3, or you use this one. As I think Oklahoma, you went to a veterinarian. When it looked like you were going to be shut down on getting the other chemicals, what do you use? Let's just make sure we have enough of the anesthetic in there to put the person out so that the sodium chloride can stop the heart from beating. And when their hearing took place before the Supreme Court of the United States, saying there's no oversight to what states are doing, basically they said it's okay. And they went and they just said, framers allowed the death penalty, we can have it, it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be this, but go to it. And so there's no oversight. In Louisiana, we don't know what they do. We don't know what chemicals they even use. Now, you're supposed to, when you have people in the state, just say, what are we doing in Oklahoma? What are we using to kill people? In Georgia, they had the person see the anesthetic is supposed to put you out so you don't feel when the potassium bromide paralyzes you completely. What if the anesthetic doesn't work? The person's so paralyzed they can't open their eyes, they can't move their lips, they can't lift a finger, and their lungs, and they're being suffocated because their lungs aren't working. And then you put in the final potassium chloride to stop their heart. What are they going through inside? We don't know. We're looking at it from the outside. We're saying, see, once you posit that you can kill a human being, okay, so it's supposed to be painful. And we don't have oversight about what happens. Now, it depends on what section of the country you're in. There's a federal judge in California just shut the whole thing down because the judge said you were supposed to look into this in California. So it's up to the states. And if you don't have careful oversight in the states, you just do it and it's whatever it is.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could talk maybe just for a minute about people in the prison system that maybe aren't up against the death penalty, but just like the rehabilitation programs
Sure.
that are in place right now.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
This has been happening to us over the last 25 or 30 years, where we started building prisons like there was no tomorrow. I was just in California, and over 28 years, they built 27 prisons and one new university. We started pouring the money into incarceration. We made drugs a felony. 2/3 of the 2.3 million people in this country incarcerated are there for nonviolent crimes. And we got to look at that. California's looking at it because they spend on an average of $302 million per execution. They spent $4 billion for 13 executions from 92 to 2006. They're looking at the huge cost of incarceration over against taking away money from education. And when we incarcerate human beings, we are separating families. I was just at the California Women's Prison and meeting with two women. One of them was there for 4 years because she forged a check. Now, the lady ought not forge a check. That's wrong to forge a check. But we're putting her in maximum incarceration of walls in a prison and the whole thing. Don't you think we can find a better way? Don't you think we can begin to have alternatives to just simply throwing people away? And see, you always have to look for the profit incentive. Who's benefiting from this? Because now you got private prisons. And so they got slave labor to do industry in the prison. Do you know we incarcerate more black men in this country, percentage-wise, than they did during apartheid in South Africa? 1 in every 3 young black men, ages 18 to 29, are in the prison system. And most of them for felony. I mean, yeah, it's called a felony. It's drugs. It wasn't a gun involved, wasn't violence involved. And once you got felony on your record, and that's what led Michelle Alexander to write this book, The New Jim Crow. Because even if you get out, you got felony on your record, where do you get a job? If you're incarcerated for a felony, you can't get public assistance. You can't get public housing. What happens to you? Well, you know what's going to happen. Donald Guyton, a friend of mine, said when he got out of prison in Louisiana, the only equal opportunity employer were the drug dealers waiting for him, which is what got him there in the first place. We have so few halfway houses. We have so few places to bring human beings back into society so that people don't go back to prison. You think maybe if we learning how to recycle aluminum cans, that maybe we could start learning how to take, especially young people, and we are beginning to have alternative drug courts instead of just throwing young people into prison, where they're going to really learn how to be a good criminal by the time they leave, and to work with them, work in their addictions or whatever they need. That's real restorative justice. That is the name on the road for the future for our society. Not punishing, and especially well, we're going to imitate you, and you kill, we're going to kill you. But all of this is part of a journey for us. And we don't start out there. And we have to go there ourselves. And thank God we got something like the opera to help us go there. Is that whole line of people? Y'all all want to ask
I think we're
questions?
do about 3 more people, just a couple more people for you, sister.
Okay, let's go.
We'll just do one. Yeah.
I have about a bazillion questions, but I'll just ask one. I am a teacher in a Catholic school, in a middle school, and I don't care what you say. We do pro-life, meaning abortion. We rarely say anything in Catholic school about, at least in middle school, about the death penalty, and certainly in Oklahoma, the priests, the bishops, and the hierarchy, as far as I can tell, of the church do not support anti-capital punishment like they do anti-abortion. Can you address why?
That is the growing edge. the Catholic Church. I'm going to just tell you something real quick. Pope John Paul, when he was Pope, changed the catechism so that the death penalty, that you can't find a justification for it. He took out of the catechism the criteria we had used for 1,600 years, that is determined by the crime. That when a crime is especially grave and especially heinous, that's when the state can execute. Took it out. He also, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, said that we have prisons, so we have ways to keep society safe. We don't need to execute anymore. And when he came to St. Louis, after changing the catechism, for the first time, we had him who stood before us as a nation and just said, put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. No to the killing of innocent life. And he added also no to the death penalty, which is cruel and unnecessary, and even those among us who are guilty of a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. The life in the Catholic Church is in the people. We learn that from Vatican II. It's the new definition of the church. It's not, now the hierarchy have a part. I don't want to downplay that. I mean, we need the leaders, we need the bishops, we need the priests in the pulpit. But what I've always done is just go to the people, help the people to get it. So after the Pope did that, the Catholic bishops, you know, they got their little web page, and you go on, they got death penalty. They wrote a real good thing on Good Friday about why Catholics should be against the death penalty. But you got to get to people in the pews, and you got to get to them in the schools. You can't just say the bishop's made a statement. Go read the bishop's statement. All that conversion of heart we're talking about tonight of going there and getting on both sides, young people have to do that too. Well, we formed a group, a Catholic grassroots group, to work with the bishops. We said, bishops, let us be the ones to help you with the education of the people in the pews in the classroom. And so thus was formed the Catholic Mobilizer Network. And it's to get it in the curriculum, and it's to get it discussed in the schools, that pro-life doesn't just mean innocent life. It means guilty life. And if you want to talk about the challenge of the gospel of Jesus, what did he mean by love your enemy? What did he mean by you've heard it said an eye for an eye, but I say to you? What did he mean by don't let the sun go down on your anger? What did he mean by pray for your prosecutors? The path that Lloyd LeBlanc found when his son was killed, that's the path. That's the Jesus path. And we got to deal with our outrage of the crime. But to be for life means that as a society we know that it's for our life. Because basically the death penalty is about us. Because we always have people who do terrible crimes, unspeakable crimes. But then it's up to us. There was a man about to be executed. They let journalists be with him the day before the execution. One of the journalists said to him, I forgot the guy's name, Mr. So-and-so, whatever his name was. Look at the crime you did. Can you give us one reason why the state shouldn't execute you tomorrow? The guy looked at me and said, yeah, one. Because you're better than I am. The death penalty is about us, about how we respond. Catholics included.
I have a question. I'm from Oregon, and in Oregon, an offender can choose the death penalty if it is put on the table by the prosecutor. What do you think of that option for offenders to actually choose the death penalty for themselves?
We have what's so-called volunteers for execution, which means I'm going to give up my appeals. They're not really volunteers, because if at the end of their process they say, change my mind, I don't want to be executed anymore, take me off of death row. They don't have the choice, but they're consensual. And the choosing of the method, it's like, you're saying that in Oregon. You're aware that what happened in Oregon recently is that the governor just called a moratorium on all the executions. I've been in and out of Oregon a lot. I go to the University of Oregon for a week and teach in the classes and do public forum in the synagogue and around the city. Oregon has had the death penalty for umpteen years. They never use it. They got this expensive machinery of death that they keep in a garage. The only time they use it is when people say, I want to be executed. So the governor, states are all in an economic crunch, and they're looking at it saying, why are we using so many resources from the community to keep this expensive machinery of death here, and we don't use it? Why not put it into Head Start, education, and all of that? So that has happened recently in Oregon, so I don't know how viable, if I may use that word, that whole thing of the option choose. What'll it be, lethal injection? Or what do you want, huh? Gas? Multiple choice.
Our last question of the evening, Sister Helen.
Okay.
This might be another hidden issue that doesn't get talked about much. I recently saw a documentary discussing how the effects of bringing out the death penalty, the people that are to be executed, the jailers and the handlers, how it affects those people who strap them to the gurney,
Right.
emotionally. Have you had discussions with those people over the years, and what do they think?
Yeah, I have. In Dead Man Walking, I talk about Felton Cootie, who was the supervisor on death row in Louisiana. And he did all right in his job till he had to be on the strap-down team. And then that put him on direct participation in the killing. His wasn't even that direct, because after the person had been killed, he went back to the cell with a paper sack and collected the dead person's belongings, their toothbrush, their personal things to give over to the family. And he called me in his office one day after he had been through 5 executions, and he said, Sister, I can't do it anymore. He said, I know they're crimes. Some of them had done unspeakable murders. But boy, when you're close to it like that, he said, I come home after the execution, I can't sleep, I can't eat. My wife tells my kids, don't talk to your father. Because in my gut, I know we rendered the man defenseless, and we took him out and killed him. And I can't do it anymore. He's the only one I met of all the people from the governor on down who quit his job because he couldn't be part of the killing. Newsweek, about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, came out with a full 2-page spread on those who have to do the killing. They talk about Jerry Givens, Virginia, carried out 62 executions. And the title of the article is, I Committed Murder. And he said, and he's real honest, Mr. Givens, who talked about his experience, he said, I'm going to tell you, he said, in the beginning there, boy, we were putting these guys down that did these terrible crimes, and you have what's called the executioner's high. But then he said, as the years rolled by, and it was person after person, and then the word would circulate that a couple of them, we weren't even sure of their guilt, but they say, it's not up to you. The courts have taken care of that. And then he was haunted because he knew what they put on the death certificate for cause of death after an execution. Even the word execution is a euphemism. I mean, you execute a business plan, you execute a forward pass. We're executing the person tonight. And the death certificate, cause of death, you got to write the truth. Homicide. You got to write it. It's a human being killed by other human beings. They may put legal in front of it. Texas puts legal homicide because of execution. But it's homicide, and he knew that. And it's the fact that the person's defenseless. That's an element in torture, too, that the person's been rendered defenseless. And then, of course, you're going to hear this tonight, and you're maybe going to see the opera, and then you're going to hear on TV, or you're going to see in the news this mother who's carjacked with her kids and killed in a brutal way, and you got to make the journey all over again. I had an honest friend who told me once, she said, I'm going to tell you about this death penalty thing. I go back and forth, and she says, the last person I talk to, if they're against it, I'm against it. I talk to a person, they're for it, I'm for it. I keep going back and forth, back and forth. So if you're going back and forth, welcome to the journey. Thank you.